I've started recording. Hello, and welcome to Working on a Dime. I believe this is episode 21, where I hang out with some awesome indie tabletop role-playing game creator people things, and we talk about stuff. Today, I am joined by Chris, and we are going to be talking about distros and selling in the UK. My name is Brian, I use he, him pronouns, and I run the entry-level publishing imprint Dungeons on a Dime. I make entry-level role-playing content. I publish books like this one in the red. It's very fancy. You can buy it at Waterstones, which means it's a real book, Dad. And yeah, that's pretty much me. Chris, do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Chris Bissette. I run Loot the Room. I use they, him pronouns. Loot the Room it's just a name that I use for publishing games, and recently started publishing and distributing games by people who aren't me, which I think is something we're going to talk about. I haven't yet got a book into Waterstones, but I used to work for them, so I feel like that counts.
I feel like you could sneak one
Um,
in. Like, you've got a route.
yeah, I've got a route. I know some people. I can pull some strings. I'm really bad at introducing myself, but if you want to check out my work, go to loottheroom.uk or check me out on Twitter or whatever, and we'll talk about stuff during this podcast show, and you'll get to know who I am.
Amazing. And didn't you just have a Kickstarter finish as well? Something really cool.
Yes, just did a Kickstarter for my game, The Wretched, which is a solo journaling RPG that uses a Jenga tower. That kind of turned into a thing earlier this year. We had a game jam. 93 other people made games for it using that system.
That is really
There's actually,
impressive.
it blew my mind. It still blows my mind. There's a review of the game in Tabletop Gaming Magazine this month, which is just unreal considering it's a game that I wrote while stressed at work during COVID. Yeah, we just wrapped up a Kickstarter and I start fulfillment for that 2 weeks, hopefully. That'll be
Well,
fun.
good luck. Fulfillment is a huge amount of energy. It's more than you
It
ever
is.
think it's ever going to be.
Yeah, I had a Kickstarter earlier in the year for Under the Floorboards, and I had to do 300 books, and that was okay. This one is 1,200 zines, 250 records, and 112 t-shirts. So I'm going to take a day off work for that.
Just one day, 24 hours,
Just
just
for
bash
one
it
day,
out.
yeah. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Uh, and The Wretched sounds like the perfect game for me because, like a Tower of Blocks, my life is just crumbling down around me. So, absolutely perfect.
It's very of its time. It's very 2020.
I don't know. That makes me feel like if it's of its time, did you say like, oh, it's an old soul game then, or?
Oh, it's just a game about being miserable and on your own, and pretend
Yeah.
and knowing that you might die if you go outside.
hmm Life creates art, creates life, or something like that.
Yeah,
There's a
something
phrase.
like that. Yeah, it's an
Yeah.
Ouroboros eating itself constantly.
hmm So today we're talking about distros or distributors, if you like to use the full word, who are people who buy things that they didn't make and then sell them. It's different to a store because distros tend to, well, in my understanding, make things accessible in a way that a store doesn't quite. If you look at, say, large chains such as Waterstones, where my book is, buy it in the red. They already have a very large curated stock, but you could call that the mainstream. Distros, in my experience, tend to be tapped into more specific markets and bringing and highlighting those. So I work for the Edinburgh Zine Library, which is a free public collection of zines of all subjects. But we also have, I know of a lot of different distros for zines and their sort of their different markets, so to speak, throughout the UK because there's a lot of overlap between a library and a distro. In that both of us have a lot of zines and we tend to talk about them all the time and give them away for free, mostly. Um,
Get them
now,
out of my house.
yeah. So, like, oh, that's also something. Distros tend to be run out of houses as opposed to out of shops.
Yeah.
So that tends to be the motivation of every time you sell something, it's, oh my god, I've reclaimed like 1 square centimeter of my floor space.
Now I'll buy some more zines from someone else.
Oh, of course, twice as many because obviously I've made a
Yeah,
profit, so I need to reinvest. Yeah.
I sold one. It's
So,
going well. I might as well buy another 4.
yeah, it's a scale of economy. So distros tend to, because I won't make any sweeping statements, but they tend to support the indie scene or for whatever it is they're interested in. So you have for example, a well-known name in America is Exalted Funeral. They are a distro, or I would consider them a distro, because they buy a lot of indie tabletop role-playing games, especially in Europe and in England, and then sell those in America. They make them accessible because you don't have to pay extraordinary shipping on a single book, because the majority have been sent to America, and then anyone in America can buy and get that local shipping price. Especially as right now, with Brexit going on, England and the US's relationship is like, and the cost of sending an A5 book, like just a little book, to the US is like 12 to 16 quid right now for economy shipping. So that's 48 working days. So having distros makes media accessible across the world in a physical format, which is very important. So we're talking about distros, and Chris, you run one. You buy things that you didn't make.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, so I've been selling my own stuff from my store, loottheroom.uk/shop,
Mm-hmm.
um, since the beginning of this year, really. And I've just in the past month started opening up and trying to get things by other people to sell. And the impetus for that really was, I'm going to show it off. One of my favorite creators, Bats, wrote a game called Songbirds, which is
Mm-hmm.
very pretty and very pink. And I really wanted it, and they basically weren't shipping it to the UK, and I wanted a physical copy. So I thought, well, I have a store, I sort of know this person, so let's see what we can work out. And
Mm.
um, we didn't actually end up having them send a load of copies to me to sell. What actually happened was I had some printed to sell and kind of paid them for the amount of copies that I was going to print. But that was how I got into doing it, and I'm just slowly starting to expand by stocking things from people that I like, basically.
So that's one way of starting a distro, as I understand it, especially when you're going like across the big pond. Is essentially you print it locally and sell it locally,
Yeah.
which can then cause different editions to arise and make everything more expensive in 50 to 100
Yeah.
years when you're dead, which we love.
When you can't benefit from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They'd done it previously with their game, The Wizards and the Wastes. Again, I really
Mm,
wanted in print, and at that point, I wasn't running a store or stocking things, so I put them in touch with Zach from Soul Muppet, who did
mm.
the same thing with The Wizards and the Wastes. They had it printed locally, and they sell it through Soul Muppet store. Um, and I just think it's a really, for me, it's more about trailing off mid sentence and not knowing what I'm supposed to be saying. Um, I don't
So
know.
let me frame a question then. So why did you? So you've got this one book that you're selling for bats. How do you want to go about curating other content and presenting Loot the Room, the distro, as opposed to Loot the Room? It's me, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't put too much thought into it, which I probably should. But so the aside from the Bats book, the other things I've got at the moment are David Sheridan's Tempered Legacy, which I backed
Mm-hmm.
on during Zine Quest, and Jared Sinclair's Anti-Sisyphus Pogs. Um, and I got them purely because Tempered Legacy is great, and the Pogs are just cool. They're just fun to have. And I honestly, for me, as a sole kind of creator or proprietor or whatever you want to call me, um, the second something starts to feel like work, I kind of lose interest in it. So the impetus for me is just going to be to get things that I think are fun and interesting that I would like to have available in the UK from creators who I think are really exciting that aren't necessarily stocked here. And like with the thing with Bats and Soul Muppet, if I can't stock something, I'm always into. I like putting people in touch with other people. It's something I've always done and something that I've always been interested in. Um, and just if you can make those connections for people, whether you can help them out yourself or put them in touch with other people that can help them, I think it just helps the whole kind of community
Mm.
thrive as a whole. And it goes both ways. You know, I'm taking stuff from the US. So the Tempered Legacy and the Pogs I got from Jared, who's running Spear Witch, which is a new distro in the US that's working quite closely with Exalted. And I know that they are now going to take some copies of The Wretched after the Kickstarter are going to be in Spear Witch. And I've just been working with Floating Chair, which is another distro in the US. and they're printing locally some copies of Go Alone and Under the Floorboards, which they're going to be stocking. And I think they're getting with Spearwitch and Exalted as well. So it just goes both ways, and it creates this kind of nice little loop where UK distros take US content and US distros take UK content and just grow the scene for everyone outside of the internet, basically.
I feel like that there's 2 points touched on there, which I agree with. I feel like connecting people is a really strong element of at least the online tabletop role playing community, and especially the indie community that I've seen. Is that it never hurts to ask, and the more
Yeah,
times people like to kind of pass it on, they've already received some kind of kindness from another creator, and then that kind of giving tree cycle just helps
yeah,
everybody. I'd also
exactly. And
say,
sorry,
oh,
go
go
on.
ahead.
I was going to say, like, it's not entirely selfless because the other aspect of it is, I stock things by Jared and Bats and David. That means that people who are fans of their work who don't necessarily know me will come to my store and then while they're there, hopefully pick up one of my games as well. So it helps everyone.
So that links into the next kind of point I wanted to talk about. So, what's good with sharing these sorts of things and also having these distros is that you can, as I said, it makes things accessible. These communities, especially online, are very isolated. It's kind of very much who you know, and people. I follow this person who follows this person, and that's how I found out about this. So when you have a
Mhm.
physical store where you collect these things, you're taking all of these separate little threads, these webs, and you're connecting them into one larger network. So, with that in mind, how do you think we can reach new audiences with physical products and digital products? You have like recommended algorithms through Twitter and through itch.io, but if you're making something physical, especially if, say, you're like, is it like Night Yeast, which is the
Mhm.
Swedish OSR like Rhizo zine? They're physical only. So, how do you,
Yeah,
if you have a physical product, how do you reach people?
yeah. So I mean, Night East have done it really cleverly because there's so much hype around it because that first issue sold out immediately. Um, they've been teasing the second one for months now, and like their graphic design and everything's really strong. And RPG players as a whole are collectors of shit. Let's be honest. I'm not saying that Night East is shit, but we like to have
Mm.
shit.
Hoarders, we're dragons. We like to
Orders.
paper
Yes,
lie on
exactly.
mine, have.
Yeah, the real dragon was sitting in your chair the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they've it's such a strong product, and the fact that it's so limited and it's just physical really taps into that whole fear of missing out thing. But if you don't want to do that, I think it all comes down to word of mouth really initially. And I think growing that audience is really hard and is a real slog. And I think one thing that people maybe don't do is think of new avenues to do that. Matt Sanders, who runs Sealed Library, he and I talk quite often about this, and he has loads of really cool ideas about how to bring people in from outside the market, the existing market, because there's that whole thing of it's the same with like short fiction and poetry where there's this idea of creators just passing the same 20 quid around from hand to hand, like I buy your stuff, you buy my stuff, and nobody actually makes any money. And the way to grow a thriving business and industry is to bring in new people constantly. um, so Will Yobst, who does the Brain Trust podcast with Adam Vass, who you had on last week,
Mm.
um, they talk quite often about zine fairs, and they go and sell things at zine fairs. Um, and I think that's one good way of doing it, like getting into venues that aren't traditionally geared towards gamers and selling your stuff alongside other people. So, if you've got handmade zines, like something that like um, Nate, who made Tunnel Goons, makes
Mm-hmm.
all these little handline. If you went to a zine fair or a craft fair with them, you're going to sell them. You're going to maybe get people involved in picking up a game who wouldn't normally pick up a game. I've been thinking about maybe things with like the Wretched and the Wretched Alone games. They're solo journaling games, so they're geared towards playing on your own. So I've been looking at going into universities because my degree and my masters are in creative writing. So I've got some links at Salford Uni.
Mm.
I'm looking at going into creative writing classes and using Wretched and Alone as a system to kind of provide creative writing prompts, and that will
You
hopefully bring
will
some
want to
people in.
speak to, oh, brains, names. It's going to come to me. He's at Michigan State University. He and I have been talking for like a long time, and he did tabletop role playing games as like a class module.
Cool.
Like we would call it like 15 credits or something like that, that equivalent
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
Creative writing in games as like a thing.
Mhm.
I'll get the name,
Yeah.
but
Put it in the show
no,
notes.
that's it's definitely it's a really strong idea to bring creative writing and role playing games together because essentially, I feel like this is my soapbox, but we call them role playing games, but ultimately the way they've developed, especially in the indie scene, they are much more storytelling games.
Yeah,
Ultimately, all the mechanics are about us telling a story together and enjoying in the delights that story can twist and turn in. Role playing games, as they originally were intended and as they are now played, I feel is much more describes like OSR in the
yeah,
most dungeon crawly 1d6 random chance roll under stat like sense. Both of them have their value, but by calling them storytelling games, it helps us understand what we want to get out of it ultimately at its
yeah.
heart and helps communicate that to other people as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot of great games on itch that are journaling games.
Mm,
And you've got things like letter writing games and epistolary games, and I think they're a really strong way to bring new people into the hobby. And like one of my passions and my soapboxes is how do we bring new people into the hobby without starting them with D&D?
mm.
Because D&D as a monolith, I think, is really bad for the industry because
Yep.
people think role play games, they think D&D, and they ignore every game that isn't D&D. Whereas you bring someone in with, you know, literally any other game, and they're going to be open to playing smaller, more, what's the word I'm looking for? They're just going to be open to having these different experiences and playing games in different ways.
Mm,
And I think not having three massive hardback books that are the rules of the game,
mm,
that can be really intimidating, and that's a barrier to new players. Whereas if you have, I don't know, this, that's the whole game. That's one of my games, by the way. Please buy it.
mm.
Um,
Little plug, little plug.
little plug. It's a lot less intimidating, and I
Mm.
think any barriers that we can bring down to get new players into the hobby and talking about and playing games is only a good thing.
Justin Wygard, by the way, is the academic I was talking about. He's run several classes
Thank you.
for Michigan State University. So it might be interesting to talk to him about how he's structured or to just follow up on what he's been on. He's on Twitter and he was on my round table about tabletop role playing games and misconceptions, which I did for Metatopia earlier this month.
Mhm.
But he's a really chill dude. Um, on the point of bringing people into games, um, what do you think is the more effective route to bring people into, or what's more important to consider? Is it the format, or is it the content?
I mean, ultimately, it's going to be the content, isn't it? Because people aren't going to play a game they aren't interested in. If someone had tried, like I started playing role playing games in 1994,
Mm,
because I used to go and watch my dad play D&D, and they eventually bought me the D&D starter set in '94. But if someone had said, "Here's a Star Wars game, let's play it," I would have had no interest because I don't care about Star Wars and I'm not really into sci-fi. So it wouldn't matter what format that game was in. I wouldn't have had an interest in playing it. I think with smaller games and more indie games, it's much easier to find something that kind of laser focuses in on a topic that someone's interested in, and you can use that to kind of crack open the door. Like my partner wasn't really interested in games. She knew about Dungeons and Dragons because everyone knows about Dungeons and Dragons. She'd seen Stranger Things. And it was Honey Heist that got her into it because she loves bears and the idea of playing a game where she gets to be a goddamn bear in a goddamn hat doing crime. And then when I said, "Oh, by the way, it's only one page," she was like, "Fucking great, let's play it." Um, so yeah, I think form matters because, like I said, three big 200-page books is intimidating, and a one-page game is the least intimidating thing in the world.
hmm
But I think ultimately it's the content that's going to get people in and hook them, and from there you can spread out and say, well, here's these other games about other things. Why don't we play one of them?
Yeah, I would agree. I asked because I kind of have my own answer, but it's nice to see what people think. I think content's very important, and the simplicity of the content is good for catching eyes. I
Mhm.
have my own Honey Heist story. I was doing a kind of a 2 hour presentation on the benefits of role playing games in relation to them being an educational tool for special
Mhm.
needs and then for children and students. And for the second half of the presentation, I just sat down with like 8 teachers who'd never heard of role playing games before. We played Honey Heist, and it started slow. Everyone was speculatively like in their business casual teacher frocks with the big chunky jewelry, like kind of a bit suspicious. And by the end of it, they were like, we have to kill everyone with bears, and they were so into it. And by the time we finished it, because it can be played in an hour very concisely, they
Yeah,
were like, "Is that
very
it?
easily.
Is this the session? Can we not do more?" And it's those little experiences that I feel are good at attracting people and
Yeah,
introducing them to the concept. Because if they don't enjoy it, then they know after 1 hour they've not enjoyed it, and that's fine. But I feel
that's it.
if they buy all 3 books, they have that monetary investment which forces them to have fun.
Yes. Like when I talk about this on Twitter, which I do a lot, when I say please play other games that aren't D&D, I get a
Hmm.
lot of pushback on that, usually from D&D players who say, I haven't got time to learn another game. My players don't want to learn another game, XYZ. And the thing is that you have got time to learn another game, but D&D positions itself as the only role-playing game.
Hmm.
It sets you up with an expectation that it's going to take you a while to become a master of the rules, and it sets you up with an expectation that this game, while it can be a one shot, that's not the desired way to play, and your game should last 4, 5, 6 hours a session once a week for the rest of your life. And if you do away with all those assumptions that have been taught to us by Dungeons and Dragons, you suddenly realize that actually you have got time to learn a game because you can pick up Honey Heist and you can learn to play it in 15 minutes and you can have a session in an hour. You can grab a story game like For the Queen and you can be playing it before you've even finished reading the instructions because they're printed on the cards and you can tell a story in an hour and a half and you can enjoy it. And if more people realize that, I think the hobby as a whole would be so much healthier and there'd be so much less arguing about whether or not we should play D&D.
Hmm. So we've established how to make a game accessible in terms of like as a product, it hooks players. Now that brings in people when they see it. Do you think selling physically in stores is an important aspect to bringing people in? So would you say in your goal as Loot the Room, selling in stores or having like comic book stores and individual stores across the UK, is that like an important part you think in the future of Loot the Room as a
It
distro?
is and it isn't. Selling in stores is great, but as a former bookseller, what I can tell you is that the books that sell are the ones either with a lot of marketing behind them that are already popular and are therefore going to sell, or are the ones that booksellers themselves get passionate about and hand sell to people. There's absolutely no use having your book sitting on a shelf in a game shop next to D&D if nobody's heard of it and nobody's recommended it. So while I would love to get my book in stores, I think the focus at the moment, especially, is just on selling to people myself and building that reputation. Um, I could go down to Travelling Man or Fanboy in Manchester tomorrow and say, "Here's 5 copies of The Wretched. Will you sell it?" And they'd probably say yes. I could probably get in touch with like Leisure Games and say, "Hey, look, The Wretched was featured in Tabletop Gaming Magazine. Do you want 5 copies of it?" If they then just sit on the shelf gathering dust with nobody buying them, then it wasn't really worth having them in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's to me, it's very similar to like I love physical books. I love having physical things, but it's a very similar argument to when self-publishing rose up and like the rise of Kindles and e-readers. And a lot of people looked down on people who were publishing their ebooks on things like Smashwords and Kindle. Like, you're not a real author because you're not published by Hodder and Stoughton or Penguin, and you can't get your books in Waterstones. Um, and I just think it's nonsense. It's great to be able to get your book into Waterstones and be in that position. And if I could do it and have it be worthwhile, I'd love to do it. But it doesn't make you any lesser. It doesn't make your work any less valuable. And I think for consumers and collectors, I think there's a lot more value in saying I've got this game and I bought it direct from the creator than I walked into a comic shop and pulled this off the shelf and it doesn't really have any inherent value to me. I don't know. I might just be talking crap.
think that leads me into another part of that conversation. I kind of already have an answer, but I again want to hear what your opinion is. But do you think there is a value in different distributors understanding their niche and sharing business with each other?
Yeah, 100%. Because that's at the level that I'm operating at, or Floating Chairs operating at, that's the equivalent of a bookseller hand selling you a book, right? Like, I've got 3 things on my store that weren't written by me. So even if I'm not explicitly writing under them, these games are great, which I am doing because that's what I think. The fact that I'm selling them is giving them an endorsement in a way that, say, Waterstones or Amazon stocking it isn't giving it, because anyone can sell on Amazon. Amazon selling your book doesn't mean they endorse it, but someone like me selling the game is me saying this has got my seal of approval for whatever that's worth to you.
Hmm. And on that continuation, how do you feel about distros that are in like air quotes competitors? So there might be overlap between what Exalted Funeral and Spearwitch sells, yet they're working together. How do you think those relationships work, and how can you make them healthy, if you can?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I was thinking about this before we had this conversation because I thought, oh shit, I hope he doesn't ask me about that because I don't have an answer for it.
My evil plan has succeeded.
Because I was looking, obviously Exalted had the Black Friday sale go live, and I was looking on it, and
Mm-hmm.
they have games by like Adam by World Champ Game Company, and then Adam has games by people like Jared and Floating Chair, and there's this whole little web of creators who are all selling each other's stuff, and it seems at first like they'd be competing, but I don't think they actually are, because they all have their own little. In the Venn diagram, there's a little bubble in the center where they all have the same audience, but they also all spread out. And I don't know how other people operate, but for example, with the stuff that I've got by Bats and Jared and David, I've already paid them for those things. So any that I sell, it's only going to be me that makes any money from that. So I don't know that there's any real competition there, other than it's more of like a communal sharing of audiences that may overlap in some places, rather than standing at a market with the same products, shouting at the same people, trying to be heard
Mm.
over each other, I think.
That makes a lot of sense. So I feel like that pretty much. Oh well, we talked about distros, but we haven't talked about specifically selling in the UK.
Mhm.
So how have you found it, and how do you think other people have found it to sell role playing games and books in general in the UK? From because you've got your history as a bookseller as well, but how do you think the indie market is doing?
I don't really know. I'm quite new to it. I've been selling online, digital only, for a few years now, but the actual print side of things and selling physical stuff, I'm quite new to. It does okay. I'm nowhere near at the kind of Soul Muppet or Melsonian level. But I mean, Melsonian Arts Council seem to do really well. Obviously, I don't have access to their numbers or anything like that. What I can
Mm.
say is that, ironically enough, about 50 or 60% of the sales that I make go to the US. So even stuff like Songbirds, which I bought specifically and explicitly to sell to the UK market because it wasn't available here, half the copies I've sold have gone straight back across the Atlantic to the US.
No, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh no! But they
It
can't.
doesn't make any
Wow.
sense. um, so
Ugh.
obviously the market in the UK is smaller than the international market, and that's always going to be a
Mm.
reality. So I don't know how Brexit is going to ruin that for everybody. It undoubtedly will. But that's again the benefit of having these networks of people. You've got Exalted and Spearwitch in the US. You've got Games Omnivorous in the EU. And I think for UK creators post Brexit, depending on what rules we have to deal with and things like that, I think there's going to have to be a big push by people to kind of reach out and say, please help. I know that Zach from Soul Muppet is about to start fulfilling Stygian Library. And I think the original plan was to do all the fulfillment from the UK, but now because it's been pushed back a couple of weeks due to some like production issues, I think they're now working with like an EU distributor, and I think probably Exalted in the US,
Mm.
so that as few games as possible hit the UK and have to deal with UK customs. I think if you're printing within the UK, it's probably going to be mostly business as usual. But if you're doing like offset printing somewhere in the EU and it's getting shipped from the EU to the UK, I think there's going to be a big change in how people operate. But I'm not an expert on that, so I don't really know.
Yeah. I think it's worth doing, and this is just like a note for me in the future, but do more research into the logistics of how the new tax legislation is going to affect incoming trade. In my head, my understanding of it is that essentially anyone selling products into the UK after January 1st will have to start paying 20% VAT to the UK government, and they'll have to do that on their own back. They can increase their prices to account for that, but they'll have to. The seller, say in America and Europe, will have to actively set up a tax account with the government and pay that in. So when it comes to distros, I feel like the workaround there, it specifically says even if the product is made in England and sold on your behalf, it still counts as requiring to have that 20% tax. I feel like the workaround there is licensing the book to someone else, paying that license, because that's not a physical product being shipped, and then the distro is the one producing and selling it and making that money. That's the workaround there to avoid that. And even then, that would be for, say, like card games, for board games. Books are still VAT 0. Any printed book material, as long as it doesn't have like a game element to it. So if it's like a GM screen, it's taxable.
Put a pair of dice on the front, it gets taxed.
Because it's a game. If it comes in a box, it's now a game. But if it's just a book on its own, then it's 20%.
I didn't realize that when I printed my What's So Cool About Magic Portals, which is a hack of What's So Cool About Outer Space. I did it with I'll show you. So Jared Sinclair's What's So Cool About Outer Space it's meant to be printed out and stuck in a moleskin notebook. Because I was printing these, I thought, oh well, what I'll do is I'll print a notebook in it and line pages for you to write your game in. What I didn't realize when I did that was that Mixam then turned around and said, oh, actually, this is no longer a book. This is now technically stationery. So we're going to have to charge you 20% extra VAT to print them. And I said, shit, okay, I won't be doing that again.
Oh, the BS that goes behind the tax system and how things can get nitty gritty. I'm doing Vice and Virtue, which is my Kickstarter right now. It will come with 7 like cards, and I'm thinking I'm just gonna slide them in there. They're not gonna have a fancy case. They might have like a slip case, but they're not gonna have a box or anything. And I'm just gonna pretend they don't exist. Like, oh no, they're just 7 pieces of loose paper I didn't staple in. Whoops! Oh dear. This isn't a game. This is just text.
Make sure it's all shrink wrapped and no one will ever notice.
Yeah, we love it. Plastic saving the day. But yeah, so I think that pretty much covers all of the little nitty-gritty bits I had to think about for Distros, the UK, quick little chat. Did you have any closing thoughts or vibes or ideas?
Now you're putting me on the spot. I guess basically my thought on it is that the only way to... Because at the minute it's a cottage industry, right? It's very small. As much as it may feel very big and loud and important on Twitter, it's a very small industry if you're not Wizards of the Coast or Paizo. So I think the only way to grow it is to do what people are doing, which is work together and build those networks and everyone support everyone else, because there's that cliche of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I think that's true. And I think hopefully, I believe in like... God, I'm just going to spit out cliches at you to sum this up, but it's be the change that you want to see, right? I wanted to see people bringing these products into the UK, so I started doing it. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. So do it.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I feel like my perception, and again, it's such a small industry that I feel like I know a lot of it, having officially put myself on Twitter and got the account and engaged in subtweeting. I did a subtweet once. I feel like I'm an official role-playing writer now.
Oh, you dished a horse.
Oof. And yes, it was about a certain Fox-related person. So I feel like I've earned my stripes. But ultimately, the I feel like what I've seen of the role playing industry as someone who's been publishing in it and someone who's played in it all of their life is that a lot of people self-publish a lot of the work, and the printers and publishers, it's all ultimately self-publishing almost all the way up to the top. Like Wizard of the Coast only does Dungeons and Dragons. They're never going to go, you know what, Paizo's looking really good, Pathfinder's close enough, let's just get one of those in the house as well, a little module for fun. They'll never do that, and it would hurt their brand to do that. That was a big air quotes around brand. And I am seeing smaller distros producing stuff, or have the intention to actively produce role playing games that they have no in house ties to. It's not just like, oh, my mate made a thing and so they're going to publish it with me. So I think it would be really interesting to see more like publishers, or like that publisher mentality of like nurturing someone making a game, helping them get it illustrated, helping them design it, helping it make sure it reaches the right markets, but not actually necessarily having a creative stake in it in the sense of that's your voice and your word and your ego going out there. I would like to see more of that happening in the world, and I feel like Distros is going to be the first way of having that happen. Especially with, say, like Exalted Funeral in America. They're actively running Kickstarters and getting games out there, as well as promoting and selling other ones.
Yeah.
So I would like to see more support in that sense. But I think it's coming. I think it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, even like the part of their Black Friday deal was that the first 100 purchases got a Troika adventure that Exalted had produced in collaboration with Spearwitch. So that's Exalted and Spearwitch, who you would think are competitors, working together to produce something that promotes a product by Melsonian,
Yeah.
which is really great. I love seeing shit like that.
Speaking of free shit, I love community copies. This is a thing that's come up in like the last like year. I'd never heard of them before. And then like it became a feature on itch. Now everyone's doing them and I'm doing them, and I love the idea of it. I love that ultimately a lot of people are offering their games as pay what you want for the digital, and the physical is like the deluxe. This is what's actually going to keep the lights on and pay my bills, because it means that everything is so much more accessible. And I know that I would never do this, but I know that, 10 years ago, I had friends who would pirate films and music to see if they liked it and then go and buy the real thing. And if it was trash, they just wouldn't buy it and there'll be no loss. I would never do such a thing, no. But it's a nice way to try something and see if it's your vibe, in that same way that one-page dungeons and one-page adventures and games are a nice way of trying role-playing as a whole concept. I like the idea that we're also able to support each other, because there are some of us with a lot of money who work single income households who have tech jobs and have so much that they don't know what to do with, and there are other people out there who are scraping by who still could benefit and enjoy from this stuff but can't necessarily afford to splurge on a whim just in case they like it.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I think it was Deep Anyway who kind of spearheaded the whole community copies thing. They've just finished their big Kickstarter for Mnemonic. I can never say that word. I'm sure it was D that started the community copies thing, and I wrote a big thread about this the other day. Because up until 2 years ago, I was like dirt poor, like scraping pennies off the pavement to buy food, poor. So I couldn't afford to buy games, and I felt like I missed out on a lot. So one of the things that I've been really conscious of now that I'm a bit more financially stable, especially off the back of two relatively successful Kickstarters, um, is putting those community copies up, knowing that yes, there will be a contingent of people who just take it with no intention of ever paying for anything. But it's at the minute I'm not doing this for a living. I still have a day job, which I think is the case for a lot of people the majority of people in the industry don't get to do this for a living. And while it's not my sole income, I can afford to say X percentage of the games that I release is going to be given away for free to people that can't afford it. And I know that people who kind of helped me out when I was really poor and gave me copies of stuff for free or whatever, um, I feel a definite sense of not brand loyalty, because people aren't brands, but I'm more inclined to support them financially now that I'm able to,
Mm.
than someone who would just kind of turn their nose up and say, well, if you can't afford it, go die in a gutter. And
Mm.
obviously, not everyone is privileged enough to be able to give away their work for free. It's a really delicate balance that you have to strike. And I don't think anyone should feel obligated to give away community copies, but I think if you're able to, it's a really great system to do it. And I've built it into the Wretched Kickstarter. So every time someone I priced it into the price of the book. So if you backed The Wretched on Kickstarter, you were also paying for somebody who can't afford to buy it to get a free digital copy, because I love forcing socialism on people whether they want me to or not.
Yes, agreed. Very much agreed. Yeah, so I feel like that kind of it's a lovely warm note. Let's force socialism on people, and I feel like that'll be to the end of this little chat. We've got another one that we'll be doing in a little bit as well, talking about design. But first, I think we just reintroduce ourselves and then say goodbye, and then I'll hit stop record, and then I'll probably get a glass of water, and then I'll hit start record again.
And then we'll
But
do it
no
all
one
again.
knows that because it'll be like 2 weeks between whatever happens. It's time skip. we should put different shirts on.
Yeah, we can go get changed on the break. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'll reintroduce myself. I am Brian Tyrrell. I use he/him pronouns. I run Dungeons on a Dime, which you probably know what that is if you've watched this video, or if you're on this YouTube channel, or if you just hear me yelling on Twitter. I have a Kickstarter active right now, Vice and Virtue, which is a moral role-playing system that is fortune-telling inspired. It's all about making prep easier for the game master, running the game easier for everyone, and giving the players an active choice in the direction of the story without ruining the surprise and the reveals that could come to them in the future of the session. It's already at like 300% its original goal. I've now got the funding to hire authors to guest write for sections of the spreads, the fortunes that you'll get to play with if you use the system, and you can see the first half of the rules, like the core actual mechanics, for free if you just go to the Kickstarter page. So just check it out, say hello, give a little boogaloo. It's got 7 days left on Kickstarter as of recording, probably like 5 or 4 when I post this little clip, and hope to see you. Yeah. I'm going to hand over to Chris. Please tell us who you are, what you're doing, and how you are.
So I am Chris Bissette. I use they, him pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at Pangalactic, like the drink in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I run Loot the Room, which is a website that sometimes posts system neutral roll tables and things, but these days mostly sells games. So that's loottheroom.uk/shop. You can find my games on itch as well. I make small indie tabletop role playing games about all sorts of things. Right now, I've got a game in a really big bundle run by Adam Vass and Willie Obbs of the Brain Trust, which may have actually finished by the time this goes out. But that's got 23 games by some really great designers in it for $40 or something like that. Yeah, pop along, check out my games, say hello on Twitter. It's a good time.
Well, thank you very much. We will see you soon, and have a lovely evening, or morning, or afternoon, or night. Goodbye.